if we went with alternative 3, we would say that it would only be under extraordinary circumstances that would be considered. I think that becomes then the purview of the board.
Correct. Which is, again, consistent with what your peer group does.
I mean, there must be some difference in 2 and 3, the way you've laid them out in this presentation. And I don't understand the calculation difference. There must be something more to
No,
the
the
difference.
calculation difference is, the calculation is the same. You're basically applying up to 25% on the final award. The difference is, as I mentioned earlier, that the scorecard would actually have a row at the bottom of the scorecard under alternative number 2 that's permanent. So every year, you would actually have the ability to look at applying an additional 25% if you so wished. Whereas number 3, there would be nothing in the annual scorecard to it. It would truly be an ad hoc, something that you might do never, or you might do once in 10 years.
Okay, so the difference would be, there just wouldn't be a line on the scorecard.
There'd be no line in the scorecard. It would not be part of assumed part of the annual process.
But it would be part of the process. I mean, it would be in the policy.
Correct.
It would just be the difference.
Just like the,
Just like the
In both
trigger.
cases, it's an option. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Correct.
number 2, the
But
option
one is
would be.
But when it's,
Every year.
we force if we adopt the number 2, then we force ourselves to look at it every year. If we adopt number 3, we don't. I think that's how I see the difference, Paul. And I understand that you might not
Okay.
see the difference that way,
Okay.
but it's not doing us any good moving forward with people on the line that.
you every year, like if you use the negative trigger example, you every year don't at the end say, should we apply the negative trigger? Like it's not, it really is more of a, has something occurred and what tools do we have to deal with it?
Paul, you said you had a bunch of questions.
I'm
Do
pretty
you have
much
it in?
done.
Okay. Jeree?
A couple questions. Thank you for your work on this.
Jeree, hang on just a second. My mouse died, guys.
Oh.
How did you do this, Harry? Did
Yeah,
you, what did you touch over
Yeah,
here?
touched over there.
Got it.
You got it?
Well, if this one, if I can get here.
Oh, there you got it.
Hang on.
There you go.
There we go. All right, Jeree, that wasn't working on that one. All righty.
So on options 2 and 3, you alluded to the fact that you could choose to adjust negatively or positively. I only see a positive factor in the policy.
So what we're doing here is just showing you the addition to include a positive. So you right now have a negative trigger already in the policy.
Okay.
So you've had that since the crash and that, so you're able to apply that already. What you don't have right now is if there was, again, something unforeseen or unexpected, you actually are handcuffed as a board, which is not good governance, to actually make a positive adjustment.
And I think on behalf of the treasurer, there's comfort with option level 1 and increasing the quantitative measures to offset market downturns, but kind of severing or creating a platform to kind of sever compensation from performance is kind of, as Paul said, somewhat a slippery slope. And if we do this for the CIO, then possibly other positions would, it might make sense to employ the same provisions to other positions. And again, to the extent there is a year that we have a very negative year, does it make sense to be providing increased compensation as a, to the extent that the fund has been hurt?
So you wouldn't. So in the case that there was another situation like you just described, which is the only time that you've applied the negative trigger to date, you'd still have the ability to apply that trigger.
And I guess, but it sounds like more what this policy is aiming to do is to provide the opportunity to increase pay when there is, potentially negative performance. Isn't that the idea?
It's to basically give you as a board, nobody else, the ability to make an adjustment of up to 25% upward based on anything in the scorecard. So let's say Oh God, like again, it's such it could be anything, but you could have, discovered that through the process that, that there's an issue in terms of either the quantitative or the qualitative measures that you set out. Again, this is to give you flexibility, not to increase pay or decrease pay. It's just to not put you in the situation that you've been in before, which is to say, oh my God, we actually don't have a tool to apply some discretion. But this is, and the issue again with that, I really do caution you in terms of alternative number one is you need to be clear here that you already have the ability on a prospective basis to make adjustments to the scorecard. So we created the scorecard to be a very flexible tool, so at the beginning of the performance year, you can say, okay, maybe we haven't got the performance measures right, or maybe we haven't got the weightings right. Let's change that. What you don't have the ability to, and I strongly would urge you not to even do on a retrospective basis, because again, you're getting into certain legal issues, is 12 months later when you're evaluating the individual's performance to say, okay, yeah, we actually got something wrong. Let's actually adjust the weightings or the measures.
Well, that's not what I'm recommending.
Okay.
It's just, I guess what I am recommending is the criteria that's set out at the beginning of the year upon which you'd be evaluated, remains consistent throughout the year. And it seems like this is just creating a opportunity to I guess, diverge from that original policy that was set at the beginning of the year.
And that's not the intent at all. Okay. Not at all. The intent of it all is just if you as a board are in a situation where after 12 months, just like you went through on the investment results, to say, oh my God, we have a scorecard that right now we feel handcuffed, that something really has wrong and been off, and we have no tool in our toolbox to actually make an adjustment. That's what it's meant to be. Like I would hope that, especially on the negative trigger, you never apply it ever again. But again, what we're just trying to do is to say, and again, this is the board coming to us saying, you're already kind of feeling that, we don't have the tool in our toolbox to make an adjustment. And I can tell you flat out that amongst your peer group, you'd be the only organization that doesn't have this tool. But this is not to be meant to apply it every year. Like, it is not. We want it. We're recommending the alternative 3 again because we want to make sure that the process that's in place around the developing of the scorecard is taken very seriously, that there are no games being played around movement of measures or weightings. That should, to your point, remain in place and be taken very seriously.
Couple of just recommendations for the policy. It would be helpful to clarify that the total that this doesn't affect the amount of total incentive pay that's received. That to me wasn't clear either. That might be a helpful point of clarification going forward.
Just on that point, Melissa, when we had conversations, when we talked about it, I had a vision in my mind, and I probably should go to Raina, Harry, and Paul beforehand because you guys are in line. Do you mind me asking my question now? That it was that when at the end of the year we do our evaluation, and we have come up with our scorecard, we've come up with a percentage of that 100%. And that we felt something extraordinary happened. We didn't look at 25% of the 100%. We looked at 25% of the percentage that we were going to give the person and cap it at whatever that 100% is. So if after our scorecard's done, the incentive award that was going to be given was 50%. The 25% wouldn't be of the 100% that the person was eligible for. It was 25% of the award that they were going to be given, correct?
The options also provide it. It's based on the results. It's not 25% of the incentive opportunity that's already allowed for the
It was
CIO.
25% of the incentive that they were going to receive that year.
Correct. And just to be clear in terms of Paul's point and the point that was raised earlier, if it was at, almost at the max, you can't go and you cannot go past the incentive payout cap.
And just if I may, when you look at the 25%, this is based on the formulaic results, which Luis has on both of alternative 2 and 3. When you take the difference and you compare it to the overall incentive opportunity, it equals less than 10%. That amount, that 25% on top of the results is not 25% of the incentive opportunity. It really reflects approximately 10%.
Right. And just to tie into
Of the
to Melissa's point, CalPERS has the ability to go up, adjust up to 100%. So we're really trying to make this, very conservative. Again, it's not, to the points that have been raised, this is not meant to be something to be applied every year.
And then before I go to Rena, I just want to remind the committee, this is something that we asked for
Right.
out of our discussion last month.
year, yeah.
We actually had the conversation that we wanted to have something that would give us more discretion. So we've asked Melissa and Luis to come back with a vehicle to do so. All right, Rena?
So when I got in the queue, it was because I didn't really understand what the proposal under alternative 3 was going to do. Through the conversation, I think I understand a little more how we would actually evaluate or implement it. But what that has led me to consider is that it's not the process for the evaluation as the chart as we use it that's laid out on page 4 of the slides. This issue of discretion and being able to go up or down based on extraordinary events, in my mind, should be in a separate standalone policy, separate from the process of evaluating incentive compensation, so that you don't add a line at the bottom of here that says, do we want to, so I realize that that's more along the lines of alternative 3, but what we don't have before us is a clear description of the policy changes that would go into guiding us on how we would decide whether we should have that conversation. And I think that's tied back to the previous item that we did not take action on related to the negative triggering event. So I think I could get to supporting alternative 3, but I would need to see it with the policy changes. And I think also I would want to keep them separate. I would want to keep the template and the structure we have for the incentive compensation as a standalone item, and then this policy that clearly describes the board's discretion to go in a negative or a positive way based on some clear
We fully agree, and that's
evaluation.
actually what we're saying, which is why we're not supportive of alternative number 2. But
Okay.
fully agree. And that's why I raised earlier the point that this presentation was going to actually tie into the earlier discussion.
Just to follow up, so I guess I want to understand where we are on timing. I know we need to be clear about what our expectations are of future evaluations. I don't want to approve alternative 3 today without seeing a final discussion of what a board policy looks like that talks about the discretion more broadly. So I don't know if we can accomplish that, but that's where I would be at this point.
Harry?
I like Ms. Ortega's description. I'm a simple guy, so you take the downside that we have, which is the trigger language that was created in 2009 after the crisis. The portfolio was down 25%, and we had to provide bonuses, incentive. And we said, we need something that doesn't put us in this awkward position. So we created that, and we have it. It also encompasses ethical breaches, and I think but I like Mr. Ortega's suggestion. So it's just really putting this in a different place in the policy. Yeah, so nothing changes relative, like it says here. This approach keeps the same incentive criteria and weighting for the CIO, period. New paragraph or new sentence. In addition to this, we have the ability, a tool, a discretion, some discretion to reward on the upside. And I would prefer, ideally, I would like to have this in place so that we can take action for this fiscal year. I'll defer to legal counsel to advise us. My assumption is that someone is going to be rewarded on the upside, that there's no harm to their pay, that they potentially would receive, would have an upside reward, that we could potentially take that action. Hold on a second, Luis. We could take that action in November. I would assume we've got some leeway, that we're sending a signal that we potentially would have this additional discretion. I could think of a handful of examples where we'd want that discretion. For example, we are driving the importance of alignment of fees, et cetera, in the private asset classes. And that is led and charged by our CIO telling his staff, being public on not every, but a majority of times he's spoken in public. And I know what he says in public, he says privately. The 2 and 20 model is dead, to the extent that we can drive that. And they can demonstrate that they've captured savings there that are significant and that compound over time. A tilt towards the U.S. equities. Yeah, there could be, we could argue get into the benchmarks and all that, should have been, but the reality is that total performance was zeroed out over numerous years, where the tilt towards U.S. equity portfolio, when a lot of public institutional investors, as I've been told, did the complete opposite. He told us we needed a tilt towards U.S. equities, and then zero on total fund performance. We didn't have any discretion to say, you know what, we should reward that. There's other examples. So it's a tool that we can or cannot use. It's not saying we will use it, it just says you'll have an opportunity to do it. And then we can address further down the road. Maybe we want greater discretion elsewhere. In my ideal world, everybody in this building would have some discretion for incentive pay, but we don't have that ability. Maybe we need it. Maybe we need it for all workers. I don't know. But we're just trying to deal with the CIO.
So just 3 points that to touch on that you've raised. So in terms of the last one, again, if you look at CalPERS, they would have discretion across beyond the CIO. It is higher. We're not recommending. We don't feel that that's the direction you should go, but it is broader in terms of eligibility. In terms of timing, we would agree with you, Harry, in terms of timing to give you that flexibility. And then on the last point around simplicity and Ms. Ortega's point, so what we would love to see in terms of simplicity is actually, again, away from the scorecard manual or process, you'd actually have just a modification to what you have right now in terms of your negative trigger clause, which is to say you have a special trigger clause, and it can be a negative or a positive. Simple as that. But it's away and separate from the performance plan. Exactly what Ms. Ortega has raised.
No, that's it.
Paul?
I think Brian, Dana, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
So I agree with Harry's statement, sort of the pragmatic approach, which is that, if it's upside, the notice is perhaps not as crucial, but I will say that nevertheless, the notice that you're giving through this meeting and through these discussions would certainly be sufficient to apply this for this plan year. Yeah, and if it wasn't 17, 18, and if it wasn't, and if it wasn't, we could ask Chris to review the tape. So I think we're okay. You
So
want
in
to?
September, hang on a second. September, we evaluate 16, 17.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what we're.
That's what, you're not talking about that here?
No.
Okay.
No,
All right,
because you're,
because I thought you were. So that's why I said 16, 17.
Your
So to be prospectively, it would
for your
be,
plan year starts July 1st, so you're
Got
a
it.
little bit behind the advance notice provision, but I think that the question is, do you have legally sufficient notice to apply this? And I think the answer to that is yes. If you approve it in November, I think you're fine.
Brian, based on last night's event, you could have said you're a little bit behind the 8 ball.
To approve what? I'm sorry. To approve what?
hang on a second, Paul. You've got the floor now, because you were the next in line? Do you want to go ahead and ask?
Well, I had something else to say, but I don't.
Do both.
I'm trying to understand what Brian said. if we approved what in November?
What you just said that you were going to look at, you're delaying approval of this until you see the policy.
Oh, what, okay, but that's not, I mean,
The
we
item
haven't
that's
decided
under-
that that's the
item that's
direction
under
we're going in.
discussion right now, yes.
And we're not gonna take any official action, I don't think.
Right, but the
in that
question is,
regard.
if you do take action in November, even though you're past the beginning of the plan year, which is July 1st, does the affected employee have sufficient notice that you've amended the contractual provision that you can apply it? And the answer that I gave was yes, there's sufficient notice through
And
this discussion.
that's the concern I have, which is, we're not defining anything today. Right? We're not, the whole point is, what Irena said is we need criteria. We're not defining the criteria today. If we're not defining the criteria, what is the affected employee, what notice is the affected employee being given? Because there's no criteria, and the whole point is we want criteria.
Yeah, that actually.
I don't think that's what Irena said.
So maybe,
Well, I think, okay,
We'll come back. We'll get there.
Okay. So first of all, you know, in response, Dana, to your making it clear that we asked them to come back, I don't think there's anybody here who isn't engaged in one of the options, right? I mean, Jeree said that she seemed to be more in favor of something along the lines of number one. I am too. I haven't heard anybody suggest
Okay.
that we shouldn't be doing anything.
I just felt that way from you.
Okay?
So I wanted to make it clear,
So,
not only to the board, but to also the audience, because they might not be as clear as some of us are.
yeah, I mean, my preference would be to move into something more in the direction of number one. I think to have somebody in the CIO's position who has so much strategic and management responsibility to be judged 75% on just the performance of benchmarks is way out of balance. So I'd be perfectly happy to see a change there. But I think that we need to have clear criteria going in. And I think the criteria in the qualitative part of under number one can be, I mean, I think it's much too formulaic for somebody who is at a senior position like the CIO. So I think those can be rewritten. But I don't like the idea of sort of saying, and this is what it looks like to me. It's like, we start out the year, here's what we ask you to do. You don't do it, but we think you're a good guy anyway, so we're gonna pay you 25% more. And so without, now maybe we can address that as I thought I understood Irena talking. Maybe we can address that by adding criteria to how we trigger that potential additional 25%, as opposed to making it completely discretionary. But at that point, I don't know why we don't just incorporate those into the discretionary part, qualitative part of number one. And the problem that I have is that my experience with a career of either responding to incentive compensation or setting incentive compensation is that what you want is clarity. The more complicated you make it, the more formulaic you make it, the more you don't really get the strategic performance that you're looking for. And I just think we're making this too complicated. So I would be more than happy to go in the direction of number one. If we go in the direction of number three, I'd want to go, as I thought I understood Irena describe it, but with clear criteria about the circumstances under which we would adopt an additional 25%.
Lynn?
Thank you. So I have a question and then a comment. My question is, the policy in item 4, the trigger policy, does that apply just to the CIO or to all incentive payments?
The request that the board asked us was to look at the CIO. We're just raising the point that
Not this policy, but the one that we delayed in item
Yes.
4.
Sorry.
It would apply to any incentive eligible participant in the plan.
Okay, and so if we make changes and tie potentially in option 3 to that policy, would that make changes for all the incentive office, investment office?
No, this is specific to the CIO.
Would that then have to be reviewed as part of the overall compensation structure for the rest of the investment office?
In light of Luis's comments about the inequities that this could create, I think that that would have to be part of the review going forward. How broadly do we then cast that discretion? Or do we delegate discretion to the CEO and CIO for the positions that are underneath them also?
Okay. And then I think my comment is, I'm leaning more towards supporting option 1. I think that the CIO has a lot of responsibilities that are not necessarily reflected in the formula that puts 75% on returns. I think he does a lot of great work, both in the management, communication, and staff development. I could get there for option 3 if it was clearly defined, but I think as it is right now, it's too nebulous, and I prefer option 1. Thank you.
All right, is there any further discussion? Arena, I'd like to come back to you to clarify comments. What I thought I heard you say is that you could move in the direction of 3 if there was, it was a standalone policy, or perhaps even incorporated with the downward trigger, that it was discretionary, and it was separate from the scorecard that we already have, and that it was very clear that it was not a tool to be used. Within that policy, somehow there's wording that says that it's not to be used on a regular basis, it's for extraordinary circumstances and that type of thing. And then also to include what we talked about, that there would be a cap of the 100% incentive possibility, and to have that detail brought out in the policy. Am I close to what you were talking about?
So my
Go ahead and I can get you in there if you.
I think I'm on. I'm green.
Okay,
On there.
then somebody's got you on that I don't have you on, so that's okay, go ahead.
My thought was that the alternative 3 would be acceptable to me if it was used in a very limited set of circumstances in the same way that the negative trigger policy is used.
And that got delineated in the
That
policy.
limited set of circumstances need to be described, because what the conversation had been up until that point were things like a performance that, when there's an issue with the benchmark or something that the board clearly saw an inequity in the way that the policy was being implemented. I guess I would say that, going back to some of the comments being made about alternative 1, if the committee is more interested in looking at a way to include a broader scope of duties in the evaluation, then I would be more supportive of going in the direction of option 1. But then having no discretionary, you don't need all of this discussion around a new option 3. So I think maybe we need to get back to a more fundamental question, which is, are we looking for a mechanism to deal with unusual circumstances, or are we looking for an evaluation process that allows us to bring in more things outside of the, so, and so if it's the latter, then we should probably get back to the discussion about alternative 1. I lost track of, Luis, what your thoughts were on the relative benefits of 1.
Already have the ability to deal with the first point around the scorecard. So every year you have complete flexibility to change the measures, change the weightings. You have that already. What you don't have, which is what I heard was the request back over the board from the last meeting, was that you actually feel you don't have the ability to apply discretion under very rare situations. So I would separate the two. I would hopefully I've made it clear that you have the ability right now to do exactly what you just said. To come this coming year, you can change the weightings as much as you want. You can add new measures, delete measures. Change it up. It was meant to be a flexible tool, but go with the separate clause, which is to simply modify the negative trigger that you already have. So you're addressing the request that came back to us last meeting. But to your point, making it clear as to how that gets triggered.
I guess I'm not clear that we really need the unusual circumstance language if what we're really getting at is wanting to change the weightings you're saying we don't need a policy change to do that. We do that when we set the percentages at the beginning of the year, right? We can do whatever we want when we set those percentages. So does the committee think that we need this unusual circumstance language on the upside? We already have it.
Well, in addition to the unusual circumstance, I think we need to remind ourselves when we change the weightings on the scale, we do that in a prospective manner.
Right.
I think what the committee was asking was that we have something that we could look back on. And then that definitely changes the dynamic. Alrighty, Tom?
So I have understood this to be a concern about needing more flexibility because things happen that you just don't anticipate. So I think I'm siding with or relating best to what Irina said last time she spoke about we need a clear policy that picks up negative and positive. The problem with trying to define the circumstances in which we need the discretion is we don't know. And so I hate to quote Donald Rumsfeld because it usually doesn't work out well, but he was always talking about the known unknowns, and this is just one case where, yeah.
He scares me.
Yeah, but
He scares me.
I think what I'd suggest is that we lean in the direction of area 3, not try and define all the circumstances because we never will, but instead require a super vote, like 80% of the voting members of the board to trigger the unusual circumstances policy that would be separate. And if we all agree, you know, either we set the weightings for some, there's some unintended consequence in the way we set the weightings at the beginning of the year, which is really possible, or the markets have just gone haywire, or there's been a 3-month suspension of trading in bonds. Whatever happens, or price controls are imposed. That was done in the 70s. You know, then we would have some discretion to adjust our formula.
Paul?
I guess I'd like to see revisions to both 1 and 3 brought back to us to consider. Because I do think we're getting a little, I think we're on the one hand, some of us are saying, I'm saying, and I think some others are, and some of us are saying both things, but some of us are saying that to have somebody in a CIO position and say that 75% of their incentive compensation is based on performance relative to benchmarks, which we acknowledge we struggle with mightily, is wrong. It's just not what we're looking for out of a CIO. So, you know, maybe we need to expand that to 50-50 from 25-75 and do 3. Because I think they're 2 separate issues, right? There's 2 separate issues here. But I sort of feel that you can address that unusual circumstance situation by more broadly defining under alternative 1 what the qualitative criteria are. They happen to be things like, you know, strategic initiatives or strategic response to unusual situations or to Donald Rumsfeld situations or something like that. I mean, I think, so I would be happier doing it that way. I think it's more straightforward. I think it's simpler. I think but I think if we want to go in the direction of an alternative 3, I would like to see some kind of incorporation of something that makes it an unusual circumstance, whether we define it in that way or whether we require an 80% vote or something like that. But I actually really think we should change the weightings, the 25-75 weightings. I think those are wrong weightings. It's my own personal feeling. So for the CIO, not.
We do mention that in the recommendations that as part of the upcoming review that we would recommend, to your point, that be reviewed, because I think that is a more recurring issue that needs to be resolved. I think that's consistent with other comments that received. But the way you've described in terms of separating out as two, kind of dealing with the weighting scorecard issue permanently as part of the upcoming review, but then also just having a well-defined, unusual trigger, that's what we would support too. So.
No. Thanks.
You're okay, right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sharon?
So, I mean, you've been listening to all the conversation, the input that we've given. I think every time, compensation is challenging, and I think we have these it's, as we, it's an art, not a science kind of conversations around this, and I think trying to get it right, I really appreciate the input of all the board members, and I guess I would move that it sounds like we can make a decision in November, and it won't impact, it may impact, but we can still use the new triggers or policies for the 17-18 year. So we're not in a rush, but we recognize the timeliness that we need to move things forward. So I would move that, can we come back with Arena's request on item 3 and Paul's request on item 1 and make that an action item and decide in November? Is that possible, Luis? Or?
Again, that's technically what the recommendation is to basically, in terms of alternative 1, it's actually, as part of the upcoming review, look at
So
the
that
new
was going to be my next comment, is this is just one part of a bigger conversation that we're going to be having this year. So we're not trying to bake the bread right today.
Exactly.
It's a year-long process. And I guess the other thing is, there was a lot of conversation around criterion, and we just approved. I know it's not maybe exactly, Paul, the specificity of the unusual circumstances, but I think we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, again, really challenging to capture this, but in the CIO and CEO criteria, language that helps us get a sense of the quantitative and qualitative nature of these roles and how to best evaluate them and then compensate them. So, I don't know. I feel like, so that would be my motion would be to come back in November and look at item 3. And
We have a motion from Sharon. Guys, we got to go parliamentary. So we have a motion to bring item 3, the recommendation 3, and also the weightings of the scorecard back in November for a possible decision then. Is there a second? Is there a second? I'm going to say the motion fails.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll second.
Okay, so now it's been seconded. I see Brian and Jack, and I have concerns about bringing those back together. One is prospective and one is in hindsight. And I think that when we marry them together and try to put them into one policy together, that's not a good match. I think that we have the ability through the review that we're doing to deal with the percentages that are in the scorecard weighting. And that's always been in our control. And that's what we wanted to take a deeper dive into moving forward. So I think it might be premature to start messing with the weightings at this point. Brian, I don't know, I might.
and capturing that with
I can understand the ask that we made last month in June and the discussion we're having now is enough notice for the look back. But where are we on changing the weightings moving forward? did we give enough notice, would this constitute enough notice with that, if we started playing with the weightings?
I don't think so, because it has a potential to change the way the compensation will be determined from what's already existing, as opposed to number 3, where you're talking about adding an additional increase based upon criteria that you're still, in other words, there's no potential downside to the employee. And when there could be a potential downside, if you move your weightings on certain criteria that you've already agreed upon, so you could, in effect, penalize if you're moving out of one category into another category.
So then I thank you. I would ask that, that a substitute motion be made to separate the two.
I make that substitute
Yeah.
motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Something too.
All righty, so it's been moved by Raina and seconded by Harry. Is there further conversation on the motions before us? Harry, you're in line,
Yeah, I think.
and we have Paul.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think I had an initial motion on the floor, and if I did and it was appropriately seconded, it's withdrawn. So appropriately through parliamentary procedure, Madam Chair.
I only heard Sharon's,
Okay,
Sharon's
well,
and then Arenas was the
it's
substitute.
not
I
the
didn't
first
hear-
time
I'm
I've
sorry,
been
I'm
wrong. No,
sorry,
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I'm just, you've been teaching me well.
No, we're not going to go back and look in the archive.
No, we're
either.
not going to. But I was going to, a lot of your chain of thoughts and questions to Brian, our counsel, was along the same lines. I do think we could have them both come back.
Just not be married together.
Yeah, in November. So I'm gonna just, my one was withdraw my motion. 2 was to bring back both option 1 and 3. For this gives us an opportunity also to speak with the incumbent, which I think would be appropriate. And then 4 was what actions might we take in November, which would permit us to take action in 17-18, based upon Brian's initial response was we could do something if we had 3, the 25% bonus incentive. It may get complicated if we were to move the percentages now to affect 17-18. But we could speak to the incumbent and maybe we can figure that out. I'm leaning towards option 1, by the way, now. I mean, you've all helped me come full circle. I do think but I would like to hear from the incumbent. I think the incumbent should weigh in on this. Is what we're trying to wrestle with is in option 1, by changing the percentages, it gives us the flexibility that Paul has asked us to have, that we should be able to have. That, diversity is important to us. He's probably hired the most diverse group of people in an institutional setting in this country. I challenge any institution to show us a more diverse workforce than we do have the investment staff here. He's protected the brand and credibility. We've had no ethical scandals or reputational attacks on us under his stewardship and leadership. All that stuff matters to us, and we haven't been able to reward it appropriately. So this could potentially help us with that. So why don't you bring back to us in November? What can we take action on in 17-18? Let's speak with the incumbent, and we'll either, change to leave things as they are, change it to option 1, change it to option 3, or adopt both option 1 and 3. I mean, that's really kind of what we'll be able to do in November.
I'm sorry. I'm communicating with the back table because my mouse is going crazy.
We're listening to you. No,
Sometimes it works, yes.
I'm having
Yeah,
childhood
sometimes it works and
flashbacks where there are a lot of
sometimes-
personalities in a big Irish Catholic family. It turned.
I'm
could get a
sorry.
little-
I didn't mean to distract
A lot of
anyone.
Like
movements
a
and,
reality TV show.
you know,
I think,
just
right?
maybe you grew up,
Reality TV
you know,
show, webcast. I'm sorry.
just
Jury, I think, yes, you're next. Let me get you in, there you go. Jury.
I just wanted to clarify, if item 4 is brought back, and it's amended, that it would be amended, to include an upward adjustment for all incentive pay and not just the CIO?
I think what we're saying is that That'll be part of the, that'll be something to be discussed as part of the overall 17-18 review. That
So maybe I'm confused. I thought that Arena's item was to bring back kind of more discussion on the options for the CIO, but then also bring back changes in the overall discretionary policy.
Yeah, so sorry, as it pertains to the CIO, we're just commenting to the CIO in terms of it's really, I'd categorize as what Harry described as 1 and 4. So we would be coming for, our recommendation as a firm to the board is that we'd be coming forward with a prospective change in terms of number 1, so having, new weightings, et cetera, that meet your needs in terms of what your vision and strategy is. But then number 4 would be something that is a revision to the negative trigger clause that, we would come back with kind of good wording around that captures what Ms. Ortega was hoping for.
But I'm just trying to clarify that policy would apply to everybody that receives incentive pay and
That's
not just the
correct.
CIO.
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
The downward trigger.
Well,
The upward- I mean, right now-
We'd simplify it to have one trigger, one special adjustment trigger. that
Either
you
up or
could-
down?
Right.
Okay,
You might
I
apply
understand it.
in 20 years, but.
Got it. Paul?
So help me understand what's the difference between what's on the table now versus what Sharon proposed and I seconded. We've
Sharon
now
propo- Sharon-
separated them? I don't really understand. What does that mean?
Sharon proposed bringing back, number 1, to make changes in the weighting,
Right.
and to marry that with number 3. After having a conversation with Brian didn't feel that we could be changing the weightings now. Because because it has
Okay, I understand.
So that's why I asked for them to be separated.
I understand, but
I don't
we're
want us
still-
to get ourselves in a situation in November where we have staff do a bunch of work and it's something we can't legally do. If we were going to change the weightings, I think we had to do that last month. And that's not something we decided to do last month when we changed the criteria.
Okay, but we're still gonna come back, because I think what I think is still before the committee and not, I mean, I'm fine if we wanna make an adjustment for 17, 18, to make an adjustment along the lines of 3. We'll see the details in November. But I think long-term, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with 3. And I think we might be able to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish better with a revision of number 1. And I hope that that's still on the table.
Absolutely, because that's never been off the table for us. We've always had the ability to do that. We just didn't do it in a manner that could have affected 17, 18. And I think we take a look at that as we go through our whole broad incentive review, because that might change all that also.
Okay. So, but I just hope that as we consider alternative 3, then we look at it as, okay, for this year, but it may not be the long-term approach we want to take.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Because I think that's what we're asking Luis to bring back in November, is we'll look at 3, because that's what we're asking him to bring back. But we've also asked him to bring back an additional that would just be a trigger, plus or minus. So we would be looking at 2 things possibly in November. And we have the whole incentive review to look at the weightings.
Right, what I want to, not for Brian's legal purposes for this year, but for long-term, I want us to look at whether revisions to 1 is a better way of accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish.
With 3.
Than adopting 3.
Absolutely.
At some point, I want us to make
Yeah,
that.
I think that comes through with that whole review.
Okay, thank you, that's fine.
Alrighty, there are no further speakers. We have a substitute motion. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? The substitute becomes the main motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? The motion passes. through the whole discussion, you guys do understand what we are asking you, right? And Jill, you've been able to capture that for our minutes?
I believe so.
All righty.
Well
Thank
said,
you.
Jill, well said.
Thank you. All righty. Moving on to review of information requests. We just made our request. Draft agenda for the next committee. Is there any questions on that? Melissa, do you want to go over that, seeing that we've added another item to our November?
Yeah, for November, we'll go ahead and add what was discussed here, bringing back that alternative 3 for further discussion, as well as the negative and positive trigger item.
All right.
Just a reminder, although this is not for the September offsite, but the board's authority to defer, that will be, have to fit somewhere in the September offsite meeting for the board to review and make a determination.
Yeah, if we're going to pull the trigger or not.
Because it's still-
And then we're going to wrap that whole thing up in, with the plus or minus and, yeah. All righty. Any statements from the public? Seeing none, we will be adjourned. Sharon, you want a 10-minute break?
Yeah, let's start at 11, make it clean.
Okay.
8-minute break.
All righty, we're adjourned. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, everybody.